The headlines this morning are running the same predictable circuits. Iranian missile strike on Israeli airbase, limited damage, intercepted projectiles, normal operations resuming within hours. The Israeli Defense Forces spokesperson stood before cameras in Tel Aviv, calm and measured, assuring the public that defense systems performed exactly as designed. Western intelligence officials speaking on background to Reuters and Associated Press characterized the incident as a failed provocation, another desperate attempt by Tehran to project strength it does not possess. Every major network ran the same B-roll footage of Iron Dome batteries lighting up the night sky, the same confident assessments from think tank analysts in Washington and London, the same dismissive tone suggesting this was merely another episode in a long-running show that changes nothing fundamental about the regional balance of power. But what those analysts are not telling you, what the carefully curated briefings and satellite imagery releases are specifically designed to obscure, is that Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Aerospace Force did not fire the missiles those defense systems were designed to intercept. The Sejjil 3 medium-range ballistic missile that impacted Palmachim Air Base south of Tel Aviv at approximately 3:40 hours local time on the morning being discussed was not detected by existing early warning architecture until 47 seconds before impact. It was not intercepted by Arrow 3, Arrow 2, David Sling, or Iron Dome because those systems never achieved lock-on parameters. The warhead that struck the primary radar installation controlling Israeli aerospace defense operations over the southern Mediterranean approach did not carry conventional explosives. And the reason your television screen is not showing you the actual damage assessment imagery is because Palmachim Air Base, as of this morning, has ceased to exist as a functioning military installation. My name is Scott Ritter. I served as a United States Marine Corps intelligence officer, as a United Nations weapons inspector in Iraq from 1991 to 1998, and I have spent the last 3 decades analyzing the specific technical capabilities and strategic doctrines of missile programs across the Middle East and Southwest Asia. I am telling you now with complete professional certainty that what happened at Palmachim represents a threshold crossing that invalidates virtually every assumption undergirding Israeli defense planning, American extended deterrence commitments, and the regional security architecture that has prevented direct conventional warfare between Iran and Israel for the past 45 years. What we are examining is not another tactical exchange in the shadow war that has simmered since the 1980s. This is a demonstrated capability that collapses the protection envelope Israel has spent $70 billion constructing, and the implications extend far beyond the immediate tactical situation. We are looking at a recalibration of what is possible in this theater, who holds escalation dominance, and how quickly the assumptions that have governed great power calculations in the Middle East can be rendered obsolete by a single successful strike. The Sejjil 3 belongs to Iran's family of solid-fuel two-stage ballistic missiles developed under the supervision of the Aerospace Force of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The Sejjil series represents Tehran's answer to a specific strategic problem: how to hold at-risk target sets across Israel, Saudi Arabia, and American military installations in the Persian Gulf region, while minimizing vulnerability to preemptive strikes. Liquid fuel missiles like the Shahab variants require lengthy fueling procedures, making them detectable and targetable during the hours before launch. Solid fuel systems eliminate that vulnerability window. The Sejjil 3, which Western intelligence assessments initially classified as the Sejjil 2 Block 2 before recognizing it as a distinct variant, employs a composite solid propellant formulation that provides higher specific impulse than earlier Iranian designs, meaning more velocity and range from the same fuel mass. The missile stands approximately 18.2 meters in length, with a launch weight estimated at 23,800 kilograms. That figure comes from telemetry analysis of test launches conducted at the Semnan Space Center between 2019 and 2022, cross-referenced with transporter erector launcher dimensions observed in satellite photography. The first stage burns for approximately 74 seconds, accelerating the missile to a velocity of roughly 2.6 kilometers per second before separation. The second stage ignition occurs at an altitude of approximately 68 kilometers, burning for an additional 61 seconds and pushing the warhead bus to a peak velocity exceeding 4.3 kilometers per second during the terminal phase descent. This is where we need to stop and understand what those numbers actually mean in operational terms. A ballistic missile traveling at 4.3 kilometers per second during terminal descent is covering the distance from the edge of space to ground impact in less than 90 seconds. Existing radar systems require a minimum of 3.2 minutes from initial detection to generate a fire control solution for interceptor missiles. That gap, that deficit between detection and response, is precisely what the Sejjil 3's flight profile was engineered to exploit. The missile does not follow the high-arcing trajectory that American Patriot systems and Israeli Arrow batteries were designed to engage. It employs what is called a depressed trajectory, staying below 120 kilometers altitude throughout the mid-course phase. This keeps it inside the radar horizon for ground-based early warning stations for a significantly shorter duration than a conventional ballistic path. But trajectory management is only part of the technical evolution we are seeing. The Sejjil 3 warhead bus, the section that separates from the second stage booster and carries the actual payload toward the target, incorporates a maneuvering re-entry vehicle with differential thrust capability. Small solid rocket motors positioned around the warhead's circumference can execute lateral adjustments during the descent phase. We are not talking about minor course corrections. Intelligence assessments from the Defense Intelligence Agency, which were leaked to investigative journalists at The Intercept in late 2023, indicated that the Sejjil 3's terminal guidance system can generate lateral displacement of up to 12 kilometers from the ballistic trajectory established at boost phase cutoff. That means that even if you successfully track the missile during its climb and calculate where basic physics says it should land, the warhead can be 12 kilometers away from that predicted impact point by the time it reaches the target. This capability effectively breaks the kill chain that Israeli and American missile defense architectures depend upon. You detect the launch with satellite-based infrared sensors or ground radar. You calculate the trajectory. You position your interceptor to meet the incoming warhead at a predicted point in space. But if the warhead is not at that predicted point because it maneuvered after your interceptor was already committed to its flight path, you miss. And in missile defense, a miss is a complete failure. There is no partial credit for coming close. Let us go deeper into what happened at Palmachim because the specific details matter enormously for understanding the strategic implications. Palmachim Air Base is not simply another military installation. It serves as the central node for Israel's multi-layered aerospace defense network. The base hosts the primary fire control radar for the Arrow 3 exo-atmospheric interceptor system, which is designed to engage ballistic missiles while they are still in space above the atmosphere before they begin their terminal descent. Palmachim also houses the telemetry and guidance infrastructure for Israel's satellite launch program and serves as a command center coordinating data feeds from the Green Pine radar arrays positioned across the country. The missile that struck Palmachim was launched from a mobile transporter erector launcher operating in the Zagros Mountains northeast of Kermanshah, approximately 1,060 kilometers from the target. Launch occurred at 3:37 hours local time. American Defense Support Program satellites detected the infrared signature of the first stage motor ignition 14 seconds after launch. That information was transmitted to United States Central Command Forward Headquarters in Qatar and simultaneously to the Israeli Air Defense Command bunker at Mount Keren. By 0338 hours, both American and Israeli early warning networks had confirmed a ballistic missile launch from Iranian territory on an azimuth consistent with a trajectory toward Israeli airspace. This is where everything you have been told about Israeli missile defense superiority begins to unravel. The Green Pine radar array at Mount Karen acquired track on the ascending missile at 0339 hours, 91 seconds after launch. Flight profile analysis indicated a depressed trajectory inconsistent with standard Shahab or Ghadr missile characteristics. Arrow 3 batteries at Palmachim and at the secondary site near Haifa were placed on alert status. But here is the critical detail that Israeli defense spokespeople have not mentioned in any of their public briefings. The fire control computers never generated a launch authorization for the Arrow 3 interceptors because the system could not establish a stable predicted impact point. The Sejjil 3 was maneuvering during its boost phase, using differential throttling on its first stage motor to introduce lateral acceleration components that threw off the trajectory prediction algorithms. By the time the second stage separated and ignited at 0340 hours, the missile's flight path parameters were outside the engagement envelope that Arrow 3 was designed to handle. The system is optimized for intercepting targets following ballistic trajectories, meaning flight paths governed entirely by gravity and atmospheric drag after the engines shut down. A target that continues maneuvering under power during the mid-course phase is a fundamentally different problem, requiring fundamentally different solutions. Arrow 2, the lower-tier system designed to engage missiles during their terminal descent inside the atmosphere, did achieve lock-on at 0342 hours when the Sejjil 3 warhead bus began its descent phase. Two interceptors were launched from the Palmachim battery itself at 0342 hours and 17 seconds. This is where we see the final layer of Iranian engineering ingenuity. The Sejjil 3 warhead is coated with a plasma-generating ablative material that creates a sheath of ionized gas around the re-entry vehicle as it hits the upper atmosphere at hypersonic velocity. That plasma layer absorbs and scatters radar energy, significantly reducing the radar cross-section of the warhead precisely during the phase when interceptor missiles are trying to lock onto it for terminal guidance. Both Arrow 2 interceptors missed. One passed approximately 800 meters above the descending warhead. The second, which was equipped with an proximity-fused fragmentation warhead designed to destroy the target through shrapnel dispersion rather than direct impact, detonated 940 meters from the Sejjil 3. At those distances, against a hardened re-entry vehicle traveling at 4 kilometers per second, the intercept attempt had zero effect. Impact occurred at Arrow 3 43 hours and 51 seconds, striking within 73 meters of the precise center point of Palmachim's primary radar installation. Now we come to the part that fundamentally changes the strategic calculation. The warhead that detonated at Palmachim was not a conventional high-explosive munition. Israeli emergency response teams that arrived on scene within 8 minutes of impact reported electromagnetic anomalies that disabled multiple vehicles and communication systems within a 600-meter radius of the impact site. Unshielded electronic equipment experienced catastrophic failure. The primary radar array, which consists of a phased array antenna system with thousands of individual transmit-receive modules, was rendered completely inoperable, not by blast fragmentation, but by an electromagnetic pulse effect that fried the solid-state components controlling each antenna element. This indicates that Iran has successfully weaponized EMP technology in a deliverable warhead package compatible with medium-range ballistic missiles. That capability was assessed by American intelligence agencies as being at least 5 to 7 years away from operational deployment as recently as the 2023 National Intelligence Estimate on Iranian Strategic Weapons Programs. The existence of this capability means that Iran can now hold at risk not just physical infrastructure, but the entire electronic nervous system that modern military forces depend upon. radar installations, communication nodes, data centers, power distribution grids, anything that relies on microelectronics is vulnerable to a class of attack that does not require nuclear weapons and does not produce civilian casualties, but can paralyze military command and control across an entire operational theater. Now think through what this means for the next 72 hours. Palmachim Air Base is offline. The primary fire control node for Israel's Northern Arrow 3 coverage is gone. Israeli Air Defense Command has shifted to redundant systems, but those redundant networks were never designed to handle the full operational load as primary systems. Response times are degraded. Coverage gaps exist in the aerospace defense umbrella, and every Iranian missile commander, every targeting officer in the IRGC Aerospace Force knows it. The Israeli government faces a decision matrix with no good options. Do nothing, accept the strike as a demonstration that cannot be answered proportionally, and signal to Tehran that this new capability has created a sphere of immunity around Iranian strategic assets. That option is politically unacceptable to a coalition government in Jerusalem that has staked its legitimacy on maintaining absolute military superiority over regional adversaries. The domestic political consequences of appearing weak or restrained in the face of a successful strike on Israeli territory would likely collapse the current government within weeks, retaliate conventionally against Iranian missile infrastructure, and you trigger the exact escalation spiral that has been carefully avoided for decades because both sides understood that direct conventional warfare would produce costs neither could sustain. Iranian doctrine, as articulated in countless IRGC publications and strategic planning documents, holds that any Israeli strike on Iranian territory will be met with saturation missile attacks on Israeli population centers and American military bases across the Persian Gulf. We are talking about scenarios where hundreds of ballistic missiles are in the air simultaneously, overwhelming defense systems through sheer numbers, regardless of individual intercept probabilities. Pursue a covert response targeting Iranian military leadership or nuclear infrastructure through special operations or cyber attack, and you risk escalation into domains where attribution becomes murky and the potential for miscalculation multiplies exponentially. The history of covert action in this region is a history of unintended consequences, of operations designed to send limited messages that instead triggered wider conflicts because the receiving party interpreted the action differently than the sender intended. But the decision calculus in Jerusalem is only one dimension of this crisis. We need to understand what is happening in Washington right now because American commitments to Israeli security are not abstract policy statements. They are backed by treaty obligations, by forward deployed military assets, by intelligence sharing agreements that make the United States a direct participant in Israeli defense operations. The question American strategic planners are wrestling with is whether the Iranian capability demonstrated at Palmachim represents a localized development affecting only the Israeli theater, or whether it indicates a broader technological breakthrough that threatens American bases, American carrier strike groups, American power projection capabilities across the entire Middle East and Southwest Asia. United States Central Command operates from approximately 47 installations across the region. Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, Al Dhafra Air Base in the United Arab Emirates, the Naval Support Facility in Bahrain that hosts the Fifth Fleet, Camp Arifjan in Kuwait, Ali Al Salem Air Base, Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia. Every single one of these installations sits within range of Iranian Sejjil class missiles. If Tehran has successfully deployed EMP warheads that can disable the radar and communication systems those bases depend on, then American force posture in the region is predicated on an assumption of defensive capability that no longer exists. The Pentagon maintains that American Patriot and THAAD missile defense batteries deployed across the Gulf can intercept Iranian missiles with high probability. Those assessments are based on test data and simulation models that assume targets following predictable ballistic trajectories. If Iranian missiles are now maneuvering during boost phase and terminal descent, if their warheads are employing radar cross-section reduction techniques and carrying EMP payloads, then the intercept probabilities the Pentagon has been citing are fantasy numbers disconnected from operational reality. And if American commanders in the region cannot rely on missile defense to protect their bases, then the entire logistics infrastructure supporting American military presence in the Middle East becomes untenable the moment shooting starts. This brings us to the question that is being asked in classified briefing rooms from Tel Aviv to Washington to Riyadh. What comes next? The geopolitical consequences of the Palmachim strike extend far beyond the immediate military balance between Iran and Israel. We are looking at a potential reconfiguration of alliance structures, deterrence relationships, and the fundamental assumptions about escalation control that have prevented regional conflicts from spiraling into great power confrontations. Saudi Arabia has spent the last 18 months pursuing a diplomatic normalization track with Iran, mediated by China, specifically because the leadership in Riyadh assessed that American security guarantees were becoming less reliable and that Iranian missile capabilities were advancing faster than Saudi defensive systems could keep pace. The Palmachim strike validates that strategic assessment. If Israel, with the most sophisticated air defense network in the region and direct American technical support, cannot prevent a precision strike on a critical military installation, what chance does Saudi Arabia have of defending its oil infrastructure, its desalination plants, its concentrated urban centers along the Persian Gulf coast? This creates an incentive structure where Gulf Arab states accelerate their diplomatic accommodation with Tehran regardless of American preferences. We are already seeing indicators of this shift. The United Arab Emirates has resumed full diplomatic relations with Iran. Oman never downgraded its relationship with Tehran in the first place. Kuwait has maintained quiet but functional channels. Even Bahrain, which hosts the American Fifth Fleet and has historically aligned closely with Saudi Arabia on Iran policy, has begun exploratory talks about maritime security cooperation in the Gulf. The broader strategic implication is that American influence in the Middle East, which has rested for 70 years on the twin pillars of military superiority and alliance relationships built around shared threat perceptions of Iranian expansionism, is eroding in real time. If regional states conclude that American military power cannot reliably protect them from Iranian missile strikes, and if they assess that accommodation with Tehran offers better security outcomes than continued confrontation, then the architecture of American hegemony in the region collapses. This is not theoretical speculation. This is rational actor behavior by states attempting to secure their survival in an environment where the military balance has shifted and where the external security guarantor they previously relied upon is demonstrably unable to fulfill its commitments. The Palmachim strike is a data point that accelerates trends already in motion. It provides empirical evidence supporting a conclusion that many regional leaders had already privately reached, that the era of unchallenged American and Israeli military dominance in the Middle East is ending. Now, let us talk about the nuclear dimension, because that is the elephant in the room that every analyst is dancing around without addressing directly. Israel maintains an undeclared nuclear arsenal estimated at between 80 and 400 warheads, with delivery systems including Jericho ballistic missiles, submarine-launched cruise missiles, and gravity bombs deliverable by F-15 and F-16 aircraft. Israeli nuclear doctrine, as inferred from strategic planning documents and statements by former officials, is based on a concept of deterrence through ambiguity combined with a commitment to maintain qualitative military edge over any combination of regional adversaries. The Palmachim strike undermines both pillars of that doctrine. If Iranian missiles can successfully penetrate Israeli defenses and disable critical military infrastructure with conventional or EMP warheads, then the threshold for considering nuclear weapons use drops significantly. Israeli strategic planners have always operated under the assumption that conventional military superiority provided sufficient options for managing regional threats without resorting to nuclear escalation. That assumption is now in question. But here is the paradox. Using nuclear weapons in response to a non-nuclear attack that destroyed a military installation without causing mass civilian casualties would represent an escalation so disproportionate that it would shatter Israel's international legitimacy and potentially trigger responses from nuclear-armed states with strategic interests in preventing nuclear use in any context. Russia and China have both indicated through diplomatic channels that they view nuclear weapons use in regional conflicts as an intolerable threat to the global non-proliferation regime. The United States would face enormous pressure to distance itself from an Israeli nuclear strike, regardless of the provocation that triggered it. So, we arrive at a situation where Israel's nuclear arsenal, which was developed precisely to ensure national survival against existential threats, becomes unusable in the scenario that Iranian capabilities are now creating. This is the strategic checkmate that Tehran has been working toward for 2 decades, not to match Israel's nuclear capability, which would trigger preventive strikes and international isolation, but to develop conventional precision strike capabilities that achieve strategic effects without crossing the nuclear threshold, while simultaneously making Israeli nuclear retaliation politically and strategically untenable. The Iranian strategy is sophisticated, patient, and ruthlessly logical. They have studied American and Israeli military doctrine, identified the assumption sets those doctrines rest upon, and systematically developed capabilities designed to invalidate those assumptions. The Sejjil 3 is not just a missile. It is a strategic argument made in steel and solid fuel, an argument that says the military balance in the Middle East is not what Western planners believe it to be, and that the options available to Israel and the United States in response to Iranian actions are far more constrained than public rhetoric suggests. We are at an inflection point. The decisions made in Jerusalem, Washington, Tehran, Riyadh, and other regional capitals over the next 72 to 96 hours will determine whether this incident remains a bounded crisis or whether it becomes the trigger for a wider conflict that redraws the political map of the Middle East. The variables in play are too numerous and the decision-making processes too opaque to predict outcomes with confidence. But what we can say with certainty is that the world has changed. The assumptions that governed great power behavior and regional security calculations prior to the Palmachim strike are no longer operative. Israel cannot assume that its air defenses will protect critical infrastructure from precision strike. The United States cannot assume that its regional military bases are secure against Iranian missiles. Gulf Arab states cannot assume that alignment with Washington provides better security outcomes than accommodation with Tehran. And Iran has demonstrated that it possesses capabilities that were supposed to be years away from operational deployment, which raises profound questions about what else Tehran has developed that Western intelligence agencies have not detected or have chosen not to disclose publicly. The coming weeks will reveal whether diplomatic channels can contain this crisis or whether we are watching the early stages of a regional war that has been deferred for decades through a combination of deterrence, covert action, and mutual restraint, but which may now be unavoidable because the technological and strategic conditions that made restraint possible have fundamentally changed. What is certain is that the Middle East you wake up to tomorrow is not the same Middle East that existed yesterday, and the implications of that transformation will ripple outward, affecting energy markets, global trade routes, alliance structures, and the credibility of American security commitments, not just in this region, but globally. Every potential adversary from Moscow to Beijing to Pyongyang is watching how Washington responds to a successful precision strike on a close ally's critical military infrastructure using capabilities that American intelligence agencies failed to accurately assess. The conclusions they draw from this incident will shape their own strategic planning and their own calculations about what they can achieve before American power projection capabilities can respond effectively. We are living through a transition that historians will study for generations. The question is whether we navigate that transition without catastrophic conflict or whether the structural stresses in the international system have reached the point where major war becomes not a possibility to be avoided, but an inevitability to be survived.